Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela Chapter 7, Text 130. Pranab Mahabaka Taha Kari Achadhan Mahabake Kari Tattvamasir Sthapan. Pranav Onkar is the Mahavakya, Mahamantra in the Vedas. Shankaracharya's followers cover this to stress without authority the mantra Tattvam Asi. Purport: the Mayavadi philosophers stress the statements Tattvam Asi, Soham, etc. But they do not stress the real Mahamantra, Pranav Onkar. Therefore, because they misrepresent Vedic knowledge, they are the greatest offenders to the lotus feet of the Lord. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says clearly, Mayavadi Krishna Aparadhi. Mayavadi philosophers are the greatest offenders to Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna declares, Tanahang dvishata kruran samsareshu naradhaman kshipyam yajasram ashubhan asurishveva yonishu. Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among mankind, I perpetually cast into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. Bhagavad Gita chapter 16, text 19. Life in demoniac species awaits the Mayavadi philosophers after death because they are envious of Krishna. When Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mang namaskaru, engage your mind always in thinking of me, become my devotee, offer obeisances to me and worship me. One demoniac scholar says that it is not Krishna to whom one must surrender. This scholar is already suffering in this life, and he will have to suffer again in the next, if in this life he does not complete his prescribed suffering. One should be very careful not to be envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the next verse, therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu clearly states the purport of the Vedas. So, here, Srila Prabhupada comments that Mayavadis are envious of Krishna. They misinterpret the Shastra to propagate a wrong understanding that, far from helping people to become self-realized, makes for them their greatest misfortune. Yesterday evening in the class, I mentioned briefly how, although Shankaracharya's teachings had brought some benefit to the world, overall there was much harmful in there. Yesterday evening, after the class, let me continue about. In the class, I didn't elaborate on that point because it wasn't the main subject of the class. Although this subject should be discussed regularly. How Mayavad, impersonalism, the idea that we are all one with God or that we are all God, this is most misleading and inauspicious. So after the class, one young man with his family came to see me. And he was a pious Hindu. He stated that he got the invitation to come to the bhajan and sankirtan, and he was very happy to get that. He loves to come to bhajan and sankirtan. So there was a little talk with him. And then I asked if he had any question. And he did have a question. His question was that I had mentioned in the class that Shankara's teachings are inauspicious. Yeah, try and see if you can do something. Sit still. Let's see if you can do it. I mean, not have to be rigid, but If you can sit still, that would be a genie in the bottle. That would be a great achievement for you. Now put your hands behind your back. You've got to keep them still there also. So, he asked, well, how is that? So, I told him that Shankara has erroneously established Jiva and Ishvara to be the same, the individual living being to be the same as God. And I said, this is obviously incorrect. You are not the Supreme. I am not the Supreme. He looked a little perturbed. Then I asked him, are you Supreme? And he couldn't answer. It seemed to be a very difficult question for him to answer. And then, after a few seconds of thinking, he said, well, can we become the Supreme? And I said, no, first answer this question. Are you Supreme? And he didn't know what to say. Presumably, he'd always heard from bogus teachers that we all are Supreme. So I explained to him that obviously you're not Supreme. This shows the insidious effect of the Mayavad philosophy, that people, although it should be absolutely obvious that we're not Supreme, that people think that they are Supreme. So I said to him, we cannot claim to be Supreme in any way. I asked him, what do you do for a living? He said, I work in IT. I said, that means you have a boss over you, so how can you be Supreme? But he couldn't comprehend. Very, very most simple thing to understand, that we are not Supreme, but he couldn't understand it. He couldn't understand it, and he wasn't openly envious like some people. They get all angry when you tell them they're not Supreme, that you are not God, that you cannot become God, that Shankara's philosophy is wrong. But it was something very distasteful to him and bewildering. More than distaste, it was just bewilderment. He just couldn't fathom it out, because as I say, he must have been from his childhood hearing this, that we're all God. So I explained some more that we're Bheda Bhed Tattva, that we are one with God in one sense. He is Satchidananda by nature. We are also Satchidananda by nature, but he is unlimitedly powerful, whereas we are infinitesimal. But it was very tough for him. Here in the West also, it's very common that people have this idea that, well, we're all God. But if everyone's God, if everyone is Supreme, then there's no meaning to being Supreme. I explained this to him. If you say everyone is Supreme, then there's no meaning to the term Supreme. Then there is no Supreme, because Supreme means one over everyone else. So this is actually, to say that everyone is God, it's not theism, it's actually atheism, because God means the one who is Supreme. And if you say that all are Supreme, that means no one is Supreme. If everyone's in the same position, then no one can be Supreme. To say that everyone is Supreme is a meaningless statement, because only one can be Supreme. If there is anyone equal to him, then he's not Supreme. Supreme means over all others. As Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita, Matah parataram nanyat kinchid asti dhananjaya. Krishna says, no one is superior to me, even slightly. And Srila Prabhupada in the purport explains how the Mayavadis, they try to say that all is one, but this verse refutes that. So it is a very common misconception. It is widely propagated by people who are envious of Krishna. They may have some piety, some kind of piety. Well, actually people who propagate this, whatever apparent piety they have is totally destroyed by propagating this envious philosophy. So Srila Prabhupada explains in this purport the Tanahang dashata kruran samsareshu naradhaman shipyapya jasrama shubhan asurishveshu yonishu. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that this verse of Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna says that persons who are envious of me, they enter into the demoniac species of life again and again. That this refers to Mayavadis, among others, maybe. But this refers to Mayavadis who are envious of the personality of Godhead, Krishna. So it is a very widespread and insidious enemy. We should know that Mayavad is the enemy of Vaishnavism. And that even if people, they themselves may be somewhat pious, persons may be pious, and they are inclined to bhajan and sankirtan, but if they hear this philosophy, then all their bhajan and sankirtan becomes meaningless. We're chanting the Maha Mantra. This is a prayer to Krishna. O Krishna, O energy of Krishna, please engage me in your service. But if we think that we are Krishna, there are various ideas that the Mayavadis propagate. That Krishna is like this rascal so-called Krishnadas, that's recorded in that book, the yoga of Namaparad. The yoga of Kirtan. It would be more aptly titled the yoga of Namaparad. Or the ayoga of Namaparad. How you don't get linked with Krishna by Namaparad. So this rascal so-called Krishnadas states that, well, I don't think of it. When I chant the name Krishna, I don't think of any person Krishna or any blue boy or anything like that. Krishna represents the reality that is all of us, something like that, within all of us, something like that, he said, which just proves that for all his being a so-called nice guy and a good singer and doing nice kirtan, he's actually an envious, poisonous snake. And to have anything to have any sympathy for him indicates that one is also infected by this horribly offensive mentality of envy of Krishna. A Vaishnava, someone who loves Krishna or has any slight actual regard for Krishna cannot have any sympathy for persons who want to philosophically kill Krishna. Just like Putana, Aghasura, Bakasura, Kamsa, Shishupal. They wanted to physically kill Krishna. The Mayavadis, they attempt to philosophically kill Krishna by relegating him to simply some principle that is represented by Krishna, but maybe even better represented by themselves. They put more emphasis on themselves than Krishna. So devotees cannot tolerate this nasty, evil Mayavad. It is evil. There's so much revulsion in the Western world against Hitler. There's so much revulsion against child abusers. But Mayavadis are much, much worse. because by their philosophy, they send whole populations to hell. They destroy the purpose of human life. They deflect. Not only do they appeal to the most impious people, but they deflect even the pious people away from the tendency to worship Krishna, and instead bamboozle them into thinking that they themselves are supreme. And in this way, the pious tendencies of worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead become misdirected into the misconception that we are all God, so that by all their worship and singing kirtan and offering some service to the sadhu or in the temple, because it's all based on the misconception that we are all God, all of that, instead of helping them, becomes, it reinforces their envy of Krishna. If you, just like this Sai Baba, you can say, well, it's very good. I'm talking about either of them, but I was just thinking of the one who had a fuzzy hairdo until all his hair fell out, and then he fell out. He fell down to where he came from, the darkest hell. So you can say, well, that's very good. They do puja, and many of his fans, they are vegetarians and they chant mantras, and it's all very good. But it's all done with the idea that he is God. Again, equating Jiva with Ishvara. So for all their piety, for all their chanting in kirtan, even the followers of Sai Baba, they also chant the names of Krishna. But they all do it with the misconception that Sai Baba is Krishna, or that we are all ultimately supreme and we will all enter into the existence of Sai, or what. They don't have any clear idea. They don't teach any clear philosophy because they don't have any clear philosophy. They're mostly not interested in philosophy. And so many of these pious Hindus, if you call them for bhajan and kirtan, they like to come, and they'll go on, they'll do it all their lives. But they won't make any advancement because their chanting is on the misconception that we are all God. So they have to hear also. They have to hear the philosophy and understand. And we shouldn't think that just because someone's in ISKCON that they're just automatically free from Mayavad, or that they can just do kirtan. No, everyone has to hear. You have to hear the philosophy and understand that we are not God. We are His servants. We have to hear this again and again and again. We are meant for pleasing Him. He is not meant for pleasing us. He is always to be worshipped. He is never the object or He is never the supplier of goods for our sense gratification. He is always the object of our worship. We cannot become Him, and even the desire to do so is most sinful. So we should understand that this Mayavad is a great enemy of Vaishnavism. We have to combat that by vigorously distributing Srila Prabhupada's books, by speaking against this philosophy. Even, like I say, people may come for years and do kirtan. We have to tell them who is Krishna. Otherwise, what do they know about Krishna? Then they get their ideas of Krishna from some cartoon books or some TV serial by people who don't know Krishna, or from some completely bogus sadhus. We generally find that kirtan, more people like to come, but when they're speaking, then they go away. Unless the speaking is to their taste. It's some stories or jokes, but to hear what they need to hear, that we are all servants of Krishna. We have to surrender to Krishna. We are not Krishna. We are not the Supreme. They don't like to hear it. If you tell them, you are all Supreme, they'll be very happy. It means rascal mentality. Simply rascal mentality. So we have to say this. They may be upset. Let them be upset. But it is our duty to tell them, so at least they have the opportunity not to spoil this human form of life. Otherwise, if we just smile at them and they smile back at us, then we are cheating them. Then we're no better than the so-called sadhus who cheat them, because we acquiesce with that cheating by not telling them that everything you've heard up to the present time is simply cheating. Now you study Bhagavad Gita as it is. So we should not join the rank of cheaters by failing to speak what people need to hear because we're afraid that they don't like to hear it. We know that they won't like to hear it. We're in this material world because we don't like to serve Krishna. We have to tell them. So that was one thought from one little incident from yesterday evening's class, and one short meeting after that. Another thing you'll find, really, people say, "Well, I don't need to read. I don't want your book. I already have so many books." They don't want Prabhupada's books. You're offering them Srila Prabhupada's books, the best thing that ever happened to them in millions of lifetimes, and they don't want it. They actually don't want it. Because they're not interested, or they think, well, I already have Bhagavad Gita. I had some bogus edition that tells them that they're all God. That they like. So we face this Mayavad day in and day out. So we should know this is to be combated, to be defeated. Of course, it will never go away. That's the flip side of Krishna consciousness is enviousness of Krishna. So there will always be some jivas who choose to forget Krishna. And this Mayavad, it's not just something that Shankaracharya invented. I mean, even historically it's known that he had his antecedents, although he formulated a bewildering philosophy, and he propagated that widely. But he was just an instrument. The Mayavad philosophy is always there in human society. Especially in Kali Yuga, it takes many extremely degraded forms that people think, well, everything's all one, everything's all the same, therefore you can do whatever you like. And it doesn't matter. There's no sin, there's no piety, there's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no God, there's just be here now. That's all that's left. No need to think of anything, no need of any philosophy. So, of course, this is not the original Mayavad of Shankara, but these are some common modern day manifestations of this most envious outlook. And the most envious manifestation of Mayavad is that when it masquerades as bhakti. Just like they have this Bhakti Fest, so-called Bhakti Fest in California. The devotees went there, they couldn't sell any books. Because the people, they already know everything. Rascals. These people are the most envious of Krishna. They chant his names, and then they'll chant some other names, and then they'll have some intoxication and illicit sex and think that they're God. They are the worst cheaters. So we should know all this very clearly. and not be misled by some outward manifestation of bhakti and think, oh, this is something very wonderful. Either side, Mayavad, Sahajya, they're both avoiding actual surrender to Krishna. Even Sahajyas, they may seem to be their kirtan, they may be seen to be in a lot of ecstasy. I'm not impressed. You have to see what their philosophy is. Their so-called ecstasy is just some mundane emotion. What is their philosophy? I've seen in Bangladesh people with absolutely, completely rascal idea, chanting some so-called kirtan to their so-called, someone who they say is the real incarnation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came but he couldn't really do his work, so someone else came again. Some village sect in Bangladesh. So they're chanting the so-called kirtan with their made-up mantra, jumping up and down in so-called ecstasy. So, this looks like bhakti, maybe, but it's not. So we should understand what is their philosophy. Before you accept anyone as a great devotee, what is their philosophy? What is their understanding? Siddhanta balya chittena karaha halash eha hoite krishne lage sudrida manash. This means that do not be lazy in understanding Siddhanta, the proper philosophical conclusion. By doing so, by attempting to understand Siddhanta, one's mind becomes strongly attached to Krishna. So be careful of not to be victimized by Mayavad. We should combat this throughout our lives. Don't prematurely settle into some imagined state of spiritual advancement. It's better to fight this. Even there are so many wrong ideas in human society. So many wrong ideas. But this Mayavad is very dangerous, very bad. Srila Prabhupada said that Mayavadis are worse than atheists. Atheists, they're more straightforward. They just say we don't believe in God. And Mayavadis will say, they'll talk about God, but they're thinking of themselves. What is worse than that? Better to deny the existence of God. Not that that is at all good, but better to deny His existence than to attempt to usurp His position. It's something like someone may not care for the government and someone may be actively against it. So the atheists, they don't care for God. The Mayavadis, they're against, but in an insidious way. They're like traitors because they pose as being spiritual, but they're diverting people. In the name of spirituality, they're diverting them into the lowest regions of material existence. So, Hare Krishna. Just a short class here. And then we can prepare to go. Alright? Any question? Yeah.
Some people say that Prabhupada, a couple of times Mayavadis came to visit him and he was very congenial and he said we can offer obeisances to sannyasis even if
Srila Prabhupada said that we should offer obeisances to Mayavadi sannyasis. Not that we could, but we should. If they're actual Mayavadi sannyasis and not just wearing orange cloth to seduce women. We respect them for their austerity, for their even superficial adherence to Vedic principles. So that's upholding the Vedic culture to offer obeisance to sannyasis. It's often quoted that in 1967, I believe it was, when Srila Prabhupada was sick, some Mayavadi sannyasi came to see him, and Srila Prabhupada was, friendly with him. And there may be other instances also, but Srila Prabhupada never accepted their philosophy. He didn't go out of his way to associate with them. He often argued with them, and sometimes was, even in the direct presence of Mayavadis, was ferociously against them. There are examples. Well, one example is where was that? At Indore, I believe, also in Varda. He was shouting. I couldn't hear the Hindi conversation. He's shouting. And these are all big men. He was showing that, why are you cheating people? And why don't you teach Bhagavad Gita as it is? So, even if, it's not that when you see a Mayavadi you have to necessarily rip open his throat. But you don't accept his philosophy. And Prabhupada, he combated Mayavad philosophy all the time. So we should, this is actually rascaldom to project that because Srila Prabhupada was friendly with Mayavadis, that we should be friendly with Mayavad. Or I wouldn't say he was friendly, but you could say he was polite to them. And that's no excuse. That doesn't mean that we should cultivate regular friendship with them. And it's violence to such people. And if one is supposed to be a Vaishnava Acharya, but he maintains regular friendship with Mayavadis, and that's violence to his disciples. If he gives them the wrong impression that it's all right to associate with Mayavadis and meet them again and again and again and never tell them that their philosophy is bogus and misleading and cheating. And we're not being dogmatic here. We can say words like bogus, misleading, cheating, but we should understand why it's bogus and misleading and cheating. It's not very difficult to understand. If they say that we're all God, obvious, should be very easy to understand. It's bogus, misleading and cheating. If we don't understand that, then we're in very serious trouble. The whole world's in very serious trouble because of this. But if we, after being exposed to Prabhupada's books, and after taking up the life of Krishna consciousness, still don't understand that it's bogus, misleading and cheating, we're in more trouble than the Mayavadis themselves. Even after having regular exposure to Srila Prabhupada's books, we still don't understand how bad Mayavad is, and we want to make some plea that somehow or other it's okay, then we're in a worse position than the Mayavadis. That means we're incorrigible. For them there might be some hope because they didn't get exposed to Prabhupada's books, but if we, after being exposed to them, still have any sympathy for Mayavad, then we're hopeless cases.